On the morning of August 22, 2016, residents of the small Spanish town of Pobra do Caraminal, rushing to work, found flyers posted everywhere. Volunteers had tirelessly pasted them on every building. The pictures on the flyers showed a young 18-year-old Diana Maria Quer Lopez Pinel. The young girl was of a very frail build at about 6 feet tall. Her black hair, brown eyes, and delicate appearance made her irresistible. The evening before she disappeared, she was wearing pink shorts, a t-shirt, a white sweatshirt, and black sneakers. The description said the girl left home the night before and suddenly disappeared. Since last night, her family, along with volunteers and special services, have been desperately and tirelessly searching for the missing girl in every possible way. They have scoured every street and explored every corner, hoping to find some trace and bring Diana home. Juan Carlos, Diana's father, was in Madrid, but wasted no time in contacting the police to trace the calls from his daughter's phone and find out the last location of her phone. He also contacted the local newspaper and urged residents to help with the search. If you have any information, even the smallest, contact the police. The police need your help, Diana's father reported. Diana's mother, on the verge of depression, pleaded with the public. We are doing everything we can to find Diana, but we still haven't gotten any answers. If you have any information, please help us. We are in a situation where even the slightest rumor can become important and help us find our daughter. Diana Maria Quer Lopez Pinel was born on August 12, 1998, in Madrid. She was the daughter of Diana Cristina Lopez Pinel Pinarejo and Juan Carlo Quer, and had a sister named Valeria. The family was quite wealthy and closely related. However, in 2013, Diana's parents divorced, which greatly affected the sisters. They faced depression, often conflicted over the attention of their mother, who took most of the care of them. Despite this, the father saw his daughters regularly. During vacations, Diana and her mother and sister often visited the small town of Pobra do Caraminal on the coast, with a population of about 10,000. In the summer of 2016, Diana's family spent their vacations as usual in the cozy town of Pobra do Caraminal. Every summer, they returned here to enjoy the silence and beauty of the place. Sunday, August 21st, promised to be just like all the other days. In the evening, around 10 o'clock, Diana went up to her mother and told her that she was going to go to Valle Inclán Park to meet her friends and have fun in honor of the Feast of the Virgin Carmen. Valle Inclán Park was not far from the cottage where the family was staying, and was a place where Diana often walked. Her mother, seeing nothing strange in it, allowed her to go there again. The girl spent that evening merrily among her friends. 4 hours later, Diana said goodbye to her friends, and was about to return home, not realizing that this would be their last goodbye. On the way, she met her acquaintance Paseo de Ariel, not far from the very pizzeria where Diana often spent time. It was about 2:30 in the morning when they said goodbye. Paseo de Ariel was the last person to see Diana on that dark night. The morning of August 22nd, 2016 turned into a nightmare for Diana's mother, Maria Quer Lopez Pinel. At 8:30 in the morning, she realized that something was wrong with her daughter. The girl hadn't come home from a party. Her cell phone was off or out of range, and this caused alarm. The mother decided not to wait and immediately called the police, reporting her daughter missing. Based on the information from the mother, it could be concluded that Diane did not have any serious emotional or mental health issues, despite a troubled childhood due to her parents' divorce. Her prolonged absence was very strange and raised serious concerns. Police began to unravel the tangle of incomprehensible events surrounding the disappearance of Diana Maria Quer Lopez Pinel, and investigators had to find out what happened when Diana disappeared without a trace. It turned out that Diana's last messages were sent to a friend of hers from Madrid via WhatsApp. In them, She wrote about a certain stranger who was stalking her and shouting strange phrases, scaring the girl. These messages were Diana's last contact with the outside world, as she no longer responded to the messages, although they were read. The next day, the police began to retrace the route Diana had to take to get home. It was there, along the road, that they found a black hairband that looked very much like the one Diana had been wearing that night. It was the only thing that was found at the scene of the disappearance. But other than that, investigators had no other evidence. Diana's friends were unable to provide any useful information, and there were no CCTV cameras on the last stretch of Diana's journey. The street was poorly lit and sparsely populated, with only a few garages and a dilapidated Boomerang nightclub along the road. Some witnesses claimed to have seen Diana get out of a car with 3 guys in it. Allegedly, she moved to another car, which took her away from the port, but these testimonies were not confirmed. Investigators considered 2 main versions of what happened. The first one suggested that Diana was kidnapped by someone she might have known. The second version linked the disappearance to a possible attack by a maniac. Diana's mother even suggested a third version, that her daughter could have been taken away on a boat. Diana's friend and ex-boyfriend reported that she met a guy from Morocco, and together they bought hashish. But this information only complicated the picture of the disappearance. An important point was the information in the media about the discovery of the clothes that Diana wore that evening. However, Diana's mother denied this information, claiming that no clothes were found. In addition, her credit card and identification were left in the house. Diana could not just run away, leaving all her belongings and documents behind. This fact and other circumstances confirmed that the girl's disappearance was not of her own free will. Nevertheless, the case still remained mysterious and could not be solved. Shortly after Diana's disappearance, the press reported on the quarrel that broke out between Diana and her mother just a few days before the tragic event. The media claimed that Diana had suffered a nervous breakdown that required medical attention, and that her younger sister, Valeria, had also been hospitalized with the same symptoms. To prevent further litigation and conflict, custody rights to the younger sister were transferred to the father on Thursday, September 1st. This was a preventative measure to avert further strife in the local community, which was already gripped by an unsettling atmosphere over Diana's disappearance. The father and his daughter left town, and rumors began to spread that the family was hiding something important. According to Diana's friends, running away from home was commonplace for the sisters, especially for her younger sister, Valeria, who was only 16 years old. Relationships in the family were complicated, and quarrels between mother and daughters were not uncommon. This information became available to the public, and the question immediately arose, why was the mother so anxious when Diana did not return home, if the girl had previously often left home? On Wednesday, August 31st, Diana's parents did not show up for a scheduled press interview where they were scheduled to give details of the investigation. The family lawyer explained that the parents were emotionally crushed at the thought that they might never see their daughter again. The newspaper El Mundo published an article on September 11 that shed light on other aspects of the family's life. It said that the mother's words that Diana did not have mental problems were contradicted by information about her April disappearance. At the time, Diane left home for 3 days and her mother did not contact police. The girl would turn off her phone to anger her mother and said she no longer wanted to live with her. Letters written by Diana and Valeria to each other also appeared in the press. From them, it became clear that both sisters were going through serious emotional problems. Valeria has even been hospitalized several times over the past year, once having to have her stomach pumped due to an overdose of prescription drugs. In the absence of progress in the investigation into Diana's disappearance, prosecutors have launched an investigation into the abuse of the Lopez Pinel family's youngest daughter, Valeria. The investigation into Diana Quer's disappearance continued to be intense and progressed at full speed. Forensic experts seized a number of items belonging to the girl, including a toothbrush, a comb, a personal computer, her diary, and some prescription drugs. These items were subjected to a thorough analysis. Investigators then began questioning Diana's acquaintances, including a young Moroccan man with whom Diana had a brief affair. All of these measures failed to yield the desired results, and further police searches remained unsuccessful. The police conducted extensive searches in the mountains, forests, rivers, and lakes near the site of the disappearance. However, it appears that Diana disappeared around 3 a.m., and the last signal from her phone was found in the Tarragona area, 13 miles from where the family was staying. 72 days after her disappearance, Diana Quer's case remained a mystery. None of the investigators' leads have yet been confirmed. In addition to a hairband, police found a cell phone that matched the description of Diana's phone. Her father confirmed that it was his daughter's cell phone. 2 months after her disappearance, Diana's Facebook profile was suddenly activated. Friends and relatives immediately notified the police and provided screenshots. It turned out that the Remind Password function had been used to avoid entering profile login details. This left 2 theories. Either Diana had forgotten her password, or the attacker was trying to gain access to her profile. Diana's phone was a key element in the case, however, it was never able to shed any light on the mysterious disappearance. On November 10, 2016, the driver of the very car in which Diana was allegedly last seen was finally identified. The man had previously been detained on charges of human trafficking. Information about his involvement in Diana's disappearance was kept secret for a long time so as not to disrupt the investigation. His wife claimed that he was with her that night, which excluded him from the list of suspects. However, on December 25, 2017, an incident occurred that became a key point in the investigation. One of the girls was attacked by a man, demanding her phone and threatening her with a weapon. The terrified victim screamed, and a couple passing by came to her aid. They rescued the girl from the thug who tried to pull her into a car. The shaken victim immediately contacted police, providing a description of the perpetrator and his license plate number. The next morning, police arrested 41-year-old Jose Enrique Abingay, who was also known as El Chico. The man already had a criminal past. The police immediately found out Jose Enrique turned out to be the same driver detained in 2016 on suspicion of kidnapping Diana Quer. However, he was then released because they believed the alibi provided by his wife. The police again questioned the suspect and his wife. As a result of the interrogation, the wife admitted that she had previously lied, and in fact, on the night of Diana's disappearance, her husband was out of the house and did not return until 4 a.m. Jose Enrique was eventually forced to admit that he accidentally hit Diana on the road and then was afraid to go to the police. That is why he decided to dispose of the body. However, he later changed his version of events, confessing to kidnapping and killing Diana. According to him, he came to the seashore to pick up gasoline from abandoned cars, and it was there that he saw Diana. Jose kidnapped her, tried to force her to have sexual intercourse, and then strangled her. This shocking truth brought new details to the case and confirmed that Diana Quer's disappearance was the result of a gruesome crime. The disappearance of Diana Quer Lopez Pinel was a long and harrowing experience for her family and everyone who followed the case. Nearly 500 days of investigation and constant media speculation only added to the pain of her loved ones. The accusations directed at Diana's parents only served to confuse and hinder the investigation. Despite this, through persistent investigation and the testimony of a second victim, investigators were able to gather the necessary evidence and find the perpetrator. Diana will be remembered by her loved ones as a bright and vivacious young woman who was unlucky enough to find herself in the path of a violent criminal. Her story serves as a reminder of how important it is to unite in the difficult moments of fighting crime, to end impunity, and ensure the safety of all citizens. Unfortunately, the perpetrator did not admit for a long time where he hid Diana's body, but later, family and friends managed to say goodbye to Diana and give her a proper burial. The body was found in the well of an abandoned warehouse. In January 2018, Jose was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 35 years. According to official figures, more than tens of millions of people go missing every year around the world. About a third of them are found alive and unharmed. Almost half of them are found after a while dead as a result of accidents or murdered, and about 2 million people disappear without a trace every year. The latter are usually found neither alive nor dead, even after many years. The story of Agnes Cavina made a lot of noise in the fall of 2014, when a young and very attractive woman who was having fun in a club with friends as if vanished into thin air. Everyone who might have been involved seemed to escape any responsibility. However, in 2023, 9 years after the tragedy, the case took a completely unexpected turn. But let's get to the bottom of it. Who is Agnes Cavina? Our today's heroine was born in 1984, July 8th, in the capital of Latvia, the city of Riga. She grew up in an ordinary family and became the youngest of 2 daughters of her parents. Agnes's own sister Greta was only a couple of years older than her, so the girls were always very friendly and almost inseparable. The parents did their best to give their daughters a good education and let them realize their dreams. Agnes grew up a sociable, cheerful, and very active girl. She did well at school, played sports, and had a lot of friends. In the future, she dreamed to connect her profession with tourism or entertainment, because she loved to travel and knew how to organize perfect leisure time. In addition, Agnes also had a bright appearance and a spectacular figure, so men always gave her their attention and compliments. The girl from a young age has always had a lot of admirers who in every way to get her attention. After graduating from school, Agnes worked for some time in the service industry while attending language courses and studying to be a tourism manager. At the age of 20, she decided to move from her native Latvia to the foggy Albion and settled in London. She believed that here she would have more prospects and opportunities to unlock all her potential and talents. Parents and older sister did not oppose her decision and sincerely supported. Soon after the move, the beautiful blonde met a young man whose name was Michael Mills. He was older than Agnes by 8 years, had a good education, owned his own thriving business, opened a small movie theater and entertainment complex, and was considered a very successful man. He and Agnes quickly found a common language and soon began dating. Michael wooed Agnes beautifully, gave expensive gifts. Together they traveled and made far-reaching plans for their future together. The couple was truly in love and happy. It seemed that a long and prosperous life awaited them. According to the memories of those close to Agnes, this was her first true love. She seemed to glow at the sight of her chosen one and dreamed of becoming his lawful wife soon. In 2014, Cavina was offered a 3-month labor contract as an administrator in one of the largest and most popular nightclubs in the Spanish resort town of Marbella. Naturally, this job implied a temporary move to another country, but the ambitious and purposeful young woman did not want to miss this opportunity at all. Michael could not give up everything and go to Spain with his beloved because of his job, but he was not against her signing the contract. For Agnes, it was a great opportunity to try herself in a new field of activity, to gain invaluable experience, and perhaps further move and develop in this direction. It should be noted that Marbella is one of the most famous and attractive resorts on the Mediterranean coast. Here come vacationers from different parts of the world, mostly wealthy people who go to have fun and spend money. Here you can often meet show business stars, as well as famous athletes and businessmen. Cavina, who has always been very sociable, liked working in such a place. Before moving, she visited her family in Latvia and told them that she had signed a favorable employment contract for 3 months. She also shared another piece of good news. After returning to England, she and Michael were planning to get married. Dad, Mom, and sister were genuinely happy for Agnes and wished her luck. At the end of May 2014, Agnes, having packed only the most necessary things for one season, went to work in sunny Spain. Her lover stayed in London, but they called each other daily and communicated via video link, telling each other about everything that was happening to them. Cavina actively maintained her pages in various popular social networks, where she posted daily photos, small videos, and stories. She got a lot of followers who closely followed her activities and work. It was obvious that Agnes lived an interesting, busy life and enjoyed every day. After the end of her employment contract, Agnes decided to stay in Spain for a couple more months. It was the beginning of the velvet season in the resort, and during this period it was possible to earn good money. She consulted her boyfriend, and he supported her and promised to visit her for a few days because they had not seen each other for a long time and missed each other very much. Agnes almost immediately got a job as a hostess in a high-end restaurant and renewed her lease. In September, as expected, Michael visited her. They were having fun, planning the upcoming wedding and choosing a place to go on honeymoon. Less than a week later, the young man returned back to London, and Agnes had to work in Spain for another month, after which she was going to visit her relatives in Latvia and then fly to England to her lover. But these plans, alas, were not destined to come true. On September 6th, Agnes, in the company of her friends, went to one of the popular nightclubs in the region, the Costa del Sol. A few hours before, she had called her fiancé, who was aware of her plans and did not object to Agnes having fun with her friends. The young people enjoyed themselves and took pictures together, and Agnes posted several of them on her online profile that night. According to the memories of those who saw her that fatal night, the bright blonde was wearing a spectacular short dress and carrying a tiny white clutch handbag. Toward morning, when the friends were about to go home, Agnes said she planned to stay a little longer and then take a cab. She was always quite serious and responsible, and Agnes had not had much to drink, so her companions saw no reason to worry. At that moment, when the friends said goodbye and headed for the exit, Cavina was talking to a man who had bought her a cocktail and was clearly trying to win Agnes's favor. After that night, Cavina was never seen again, alive or dead. It seemed as if she had simply vanished into the crowded nightclub. No one could remember what time and with whom the blonde left the establishment, or where she had gone afterwards. The next day, Agnes did not show up at work, and when trying to contact her, it turned out that her phone was switched off. Colleagues and friends were the first to raise the alarm, but the police were slow to respond to their missing persons report. Toward evening, a worried Michael called Agnes's mother and said that he had been unable to contact his fiancée all day, which had never happened before. The next day, Agnes's parents and fiancé jointly tried to contact the Spanish police to report the disappearance. However, they were told that the relatives had to file such a report in person, otherwise it would not be considered. After these words, Michael and Clavin's family took the next flight to Marbella. In the end, the missing persons report was filed by the family only 5 days after Agnes had disappeared without a trace. The first thing that was checked was the apartment Agnes had rented, but it looked as if the owner had gone out for a while and would be back soon. Documents, money, and a few expensive pieces of jewelry were in their places. The refrigerator was stocked with prepared food, and on the bed were several outfits from which Agnes had chosen what to wear to the club on her last night. It was obvious that Cavina had not been in her apartment since the day she had gone out with her friends. Her phone had been turned off, she had left no more posts on social media, and she had not responded to any messages. It was only then that the police began investigating the disappearance, but precious time was irretrievably lost. Agnes's friends and family began to post flyers all over the city with her picture and requests for help in the search. The story was also picked up by the media, featured on television news programs, and Agnes's pictures were on the front pages of local newspapers. The first leads and clues emerged after the police studied the footage from the CCTV cameras located inside and outside the entertainment venue. However, there were also some problems with this, because all the files had already been erased by that time, and the police had to ask for help from specialists in order to restore them. But the efforts were not in vain, and on one of the recordings, made by a camera located at the exit to the parking lot, it was seen how Agnes, around 6 o'clock in the morning, leaves the club with a man, and does it clearly not of her own free will. This last footage which showed Cavina alive, was to be studied in detail, but the closer the experts looked at them, the more frightening they seemed. Agnes was being led by a man of large build, and it was obvious that she was walking with him under compulsion because he was holding her tightly by the waist. Agnes looked frightened, tried to break free several times and said something emotionally, but her companion persistently led her to the parking lot, where he literally forced her into his Mercedes A63 with tinted windows. At the moment when the big man was pushing her into the cabin, it was visible that another man was already inside. While the first man was heading for the driver's seat, Agnes managed to open the car door, after which she tried to get out and escape. But at that moment, the doorman who was standing next to her came up, and the driver gestured and said something. The doorman pushed Agnes back into the car, after which the driver handed him something, apparently a cash reward for his help. About 6 minutes after Agnes was in the car, her phone was switched off and was never switched on again. It was also impossible to trace the further movement of the vehicle because there were no CCTV cameras along the way. It became obvious that the men who were in the cabin were the last to contact the missing beauty. Surprisingly, the case was given a high level of secrecy from the start. Everyone involved in the investigation signed non-disclosure documents, and information was not only kept out of the press, but even Agnes's loved ones were hardly ever given any information. For the first few months, parents and fiancé were kept in the dark. They were only told that the investigation was underway and that it was too early to draw any conclusions. But judging by the fact that Agnes had not given any information about herself during this time, there was little hope that she was still alive. Michael periodically gave interviews in which he asked for help in finding his fiancée, but no one ever responded to his requests. Only 6 months later, the relatives were shown the very footage from the club cameras, as well as the names of all 3 men who had last contacted Agnes. The large man who had forcibly taken the young woman out of the club and pushed her into the car was identified as Wesley Capper, the son of a well-known British millionaire and a very powerful man. In the passenger compartment of the car sat his longtime buddy named Craig Porter, who had no particular occupation and was periodically on the police's radar. The third was a dark-skinned doorman whose name was Sian Usman. Porter and Usman stated unanimously under interrogation that they were innocent, that Agnes had gotten into the car voluntarily. According to Capper, he and a friend spotted the beautiful blonde in a club and approached her to get acquainted. She was allegedly already pretty drunk, which contradicts the testimony of her friends, but didn't refuse a drink when they bought her a drink. Wesley then proposed to continue the party at his luxurious house in the country, to which Agnes agreed. Already in the car, Agnes allegedly changed her mind about going to the private party at Wesley's house and asked to be dropped off in the middle of the road, saying she would take a cab and go to her home. The man claimed to have dropped the passenger off where she asked, which was an unlit stretch of road that soon turned out to have no CCTV cameras either. But Craig Porter could neither confirm nor deny the words of Wesley Capper, because he himself, according to his confession, was also very drunk and did not even understand when and how Agnes was in their car. Moreover, he stated that he fell asleep as soon as they drove away from the parking lot, and when he woke up, the young woman was no longer in the cabin. The third suspect, the doorman Sian Usman, also said that Agnes Cavina was drunk, but could not answer the question whether she had gotten into the car voluntarily. He did, however, confirm that when the car touched down, the blonde opened the door and almost fell out as she was driving. Then the doorman, at the request of the driver, slammed the door, for which he received a substantial tip. When Sian Usman was asked whether he thought it was strange that the woman had tried to escape by jumping out of the car while walking, he said he didn't think it was an escape attempt. In his opinion, she could have accidentally opened the door because she was intoxicated. He also added that Agnes did not scream or ask for help. The footage clearly showed Wesley Capper forcefully leading Agnes to the car, holding her by the waist and wrist. Wesley's defense was that Agnes was dizzy and he was holding her down so that she would not fall. Sometime later, the investigation came across another curious but also strange and frightening video, which was made in Soto Grande in the south of Spain, in the port of Puerto de la Duquesa. The luxury yacht of John Capper, a millionaire who was the father of one of the suspects, was moored there. The footage, dated September 10th, 4 days after Agnes's disappearance, shows Wesley, Craig, and 2 other men boarding the yacht. They were carrying a large suitcase which, judging from the footage, was quite weighty, as well as a rolled-up carpet. When the company returned to the port of Puerto de la Duquesa a few days later, they had no luggage with them. After the footage was shown to Capper, he claimed that he and his friends had sailed to Ibiza to have fun. The suitcase, he said, contained their belongings, and what the investigation mistook for a carpet was bedding. Where it all subsequently went, he could not explain. A thorough search of Wesley's yacht and automobile yielded no results. As it turned out, both had been cleaned and dry cleaned, destroying any traces of DNA. However, a long blonde hair was found in the trunk of the car, but it was not possible to establish its origin because this crucial evidence mysteriously evaporated during the investigation. At the trial, the prosecution told another curious detail. As it turned out, a few hours after Agnes was in the defendant's car, Capper called the emergency services several times, but each time he dropped the call without waiting for an answer, as if he was afraid or doubted the correctness of his actions. The man himself explained that he was drunk and made the calls randomly. The lawyer for the Clavin family stated that Agnes, in his opinion, was long dead, and that her body was resting somewhere on the seabed in the very suitcase that the suspects had brought aboard the yacht. In addition, he believed that the case was deliberately delayed, and the criminals had plenty of time to get rid of all the evidence that could prove their guilt. Only a year and a half after Agnes's disappearance, Capper, Porter, and Usman found themselves in the dock. They were accused of holding Agnes against her will and forcing her into a car. Unfortunately, due to the lack of evidence, there was nothing more to charge them with. Moreover, the millionaire and his friend were released on bail and quietly left the courtroom. Naturally, Agnes's relatives were outraged by this, but the judge was adamant. All 3 men were only brought to trial again in 2019, almost 5 years after Agnes's disappearance. They still denied their guilt and insisted that Cavina had gotten into the car of her own free will. The prosecutor asked that the doorman be considered an accomplice to the crime because he helped the defendants drive the victim away. Usman could have received a sentence of 5 years in prison for his actions. In response, he made a fiery speech in which he said that he was among the suspects because of the color of his skin, as well as the lack of opportunity to hire a good lawyer, because all the money he earns he sends to a starving family in Africa. Capper and Porter's lawyers insisted that their clients were guilty only of persuading Agnes to get into the car, but not of forcing her to do so. In their opinion, the young woman was dropped off on the road as she had requested, but while she was waiting for a cab to go home, she could have been kidnapped and killed by third parties because Agnes was drunk and could not offer much resistance. The verdict of the judge surprised and angered the relatives of the missing young woman because none of the defendants, in fact, was not punished at all. Usman was cleared of all charges. Capper was sentenced to 2 years for taking advantage of Agnes's drunken state to persuade her to get into his car, and Porter received 6 months for complicity. In reality, the men received suspended sentences and did not spend a single day in prison, but paid Agnes's family the ridiculous sum of £10,000 sterling in compensation. Clavin's family were discouraged by the decision and appealed. And then it turned out that both defendants in the case, while waiting for the court's decision, managed to break the law once again. Capper, being in a state of alcoholic and drug intoxication, knocked down a woman to death and fled the scene, and Porter and his friend, also drunk, stole a car, having previously beaten its owner to a pulp. But even for this serious crime, Capper was sentenced only to probation thanks to the brilliantly built defense of his lawyers. He paid a large sum in compensation to the family of the woman killed under the wheels of his car, and he himself remained at large. Porter was less fortunate this time, and he still went to jail, but there is no information in public sources about the sentence he received. In 2021, almost 7 years after Agnes's disappearance, the main suspect in the case was punished. Wesley had been living an immoral lifestyle all this time, abusing alcohol and illicit substances, which had severely compromised his health. At the height of the COVID pandemic, he found himself in a hospital bed, and when he thought he had conquered the disease, he suddenly had a stroke. Capper died on July 26, 2021, in his 44th year of life. At that time, Agnes's parents filed another appeal with the court. But now the suspect can no longer be prosecuted because he is dead, no matter what the Supreme Court decides in this difficult case. An unexpected twist 9 years later. Although Agnes Cavina was never found dead or alive, she was still presumed dead sometime later. Her parents, sister and fiancé, agreed with the lawyer's version that the criminals had placed Agnes's body in a suitcase, which was subsequently loaded onto a yacht and dumped somewhere on the high seas so that it could not be found. However, in the summer of 2023, 9 years after Agnes disappeared without a trace, the case took an unexpected turn. So, in mid-June, a gardener of one of the elite golf clubs, La Quita, located in the Costa del Sol region, cleaning the area, found a strange object near the coast, which, upon closer inspection, turned out to be an old, badly damaged suitcase. The man did not dare to open it himself and called the police. Inside the suitcase, law enforcers found human remains. The examination showed that the bones found belonged to a young woman whose approximate age at the time of death was 25, 35 years old. In addition, it was also found that the suitcase with the body inside had spent about 10 years in the water before it was brought to the shore. After comparing all the facts, the police hypothesized that the body found belonged to Agnes Cavina, who disappeared 9 years ago. In order to establish this unequivocally, a number of examinations are required to compare Agnes's DNA with the remains found. At the moment, experts are working closely on this issue, but the details of the investigation have not yet been made public. If the suspicions are confirmed, it will be a reason to reopen the case and bring the surviving suspects to trial. Fear is a negative and unpleasant feeling. Would anyone want to experience it over and over again? Cassandra and her twin brother Rob were the exception. As young children, they couldn't go a day without the scary stories they liked to tell each other in a room with the lights off. Rob was a natural storyteller, or at least he thought he was. Cassandra would scream at every story he told, and he, playing the brave though small man, would sprawl on his bed mumbling, "You can't even scare the neighbor's little Joey with stories like that. No, scary stories are not your thing." They also watched the animated series Scooby-Doo together, and while watching it, they argued over which of the characters in the story would turn out to be a ghost or a vampire in disguise. Cassandra's intuitive guesses were often ahead of her brother, and then he was nervous. Their mother, Mary Smith, although she did not share the passion of the twins, but to instill in her children a love of reading, bought them books by Robert Wall. Love for scary stories was not a childhood hobby, but a passion that brother and sister carried through life. They even collected figurines of villains, and as adults, seriously considered opening a themed store associated with this culture of horror. An interest in horror movies brought Cassandra to the set in 2004. She got a cameo in a scary movie that, although it didn't become popular, still caused a storm of envy in Rob, and he started asking his sister to make a deal for him. "You must have made some acquaintances there, right? I'm ready to play any one. Well, talk, CAs, please." "I'm pretty close with the head of the cast. Maybe something will come out of it, but no promises. I got the part by accident myself, after all." Cassandra replied. Roby was very happy, but to play, albeit in an episodic role, he was not able to. The head of the cast in that movie was Colin Dudley, and on the set between him and debuting actress flashed a spark. To make the first step, each of them did not dare. That all changed during a corporate Halloween party. Cassandra dressed up as Velma from Scooby-Doo, and Colin dressed up as Alex from A Clockwork Orange. And if for Cassandra, the image of the cartoon character was just an image, then, for Colin Dudley, it seemed, he was something more. He was walking with a glass of milk all evening, looking at everyone with a glare just as his character did in the movie, and also, he talked a lot of quotes from the book. For example, looking at Cassandra with delight, he said, "Beauty invariably caused my only desire to destroy it, for it did not fit at all into our ugly world." Cassandra thought it was a compliment, and they soon began dating, but their relationship didn't last long, only a couple months. Colin found another actress, Rebecca, and started dating her, and later on the couple started living together. August 25th, 2020. Cassandra Cantrell disappeared. She, without warning anyone, drove her car away from home in an unknown direction and did not answer phone calls. The police officers were very reluctant to take a report from her mother for a very long time, trying to calm the poor woman down and saying that sometimes children grow up and don't always warn their parents when they go out with friends. But Mary Smith was sure that something terrible had happened, and maybe if the lazy cops would finally start working, she would still have a chance to see her daughter alive. The search for Cassandra did not begin until 2 days later, and on the third day, the police found her car under a bridge, not in the most favorable area. Also, to add to the bad news, the car was unlocked, and the keys were inside. It was impossible to understand what Cassandra was doing here. This place was considered a neighborhood of homeless people, where with frequent frequency the police found their bodies, killed in a domestic fight, or died of an overdose of illegal drugs. The officers had to go around the neighborhood, questioning a lot of homeless people who, at the sight of the police, tried to get away for a while, but it was all to no avail. None of them had seen Cassandra, and none of them knew when the car showed up here. It was hard to expect anything else from the residents who lived under the bridge and drank alcohol all day long. The detective involved in the search for Cassandra had requested her cell phone billing, as he was instructed to do, but from experience he was sure it would get him nowhere. So it did. The signal showed that the phone was in the nearest body of water to the bridge, which meant that the detectives would not be able to recover it and get the information they needed. Nevertheless, a team of divers began searching the coastal area, and before they did so, standing on the shore, they picked up rocks from the ground and threw them into the water, testing how far they could throw the phone. Cassandra's mother said that her missing daughter's phone case was decorated with rhinestones, which meant it would not be difficult to find. Indeed, the phone was soon found, but Cassandra's body was not in the water. This was presented to her mother as good news, but the poor woman did not feel any better. She seemed to have gotten used to the idea that her daughter was dead, and the only thing she wanted was for her body to be found, and for this nightmare of uncertainty to end. I was looking forward to my granddaughter. I wanted to be a grandmother sooner, and I didn't even have time to give her a crib. It's just sitting in the garage in a box. What should I do with it now? Saddened the mother, and did not realize that this became important information for the investigation. According to statistics, a high percentage of crimes against pregnant women are committed by their partners, the fathers-to-be. But Mary Smith did not know who the father of her future granddaughter was. Cassandra, as it seemed to her, despite her already realized age, was not married and did not even meet anyone. It was understandable that she had gotten pregnant by a man, but Mary had no information about the potential father of the child. Although, again from the words of her mother, her daughter very often corresponded with someone and called, but the phone number of her interlocutor for some reason was not recorded in the daughter's book, and the mother, of course, did not remember the numbers. She just noticed that it is quite strange to communicate so often with a person and not write down his number. Girls, as it was known, could not keep their relationships in absolute secrecy, and there should be at least one friend with whom Cassandra shared her secrets, and especially if those secrets were related to pregnancy. And such a friend was found. In a conversation with police officers, she revealed that Cassandra had rekindled her relationship with her former boyfriend, Colin Dudley. Yes, their past relationship in 2004 was short-lived, and besides, it's been 15 years since their breakup. It is strange in general that after so much time they remembered each other. As it turned out, Colin himself came out to Cassandra, with whom he once worked on a movie set. In 2014, he found Cassandra on Facebook, wrote some warm words, and confessed that just recently his father died, with whom his wife, Rebecca, had a difficult relationship, and so he had no one to share his grief with. Cassandra, purely because of friendly motives, decided to meet and talk to the ex-boyfriend to calm him down, but the friendly meeting turned into something more. Since 2014, Colin began to live literally on two families, where Cassandra was in the status of mistress. When the young woman found out that she was pregnant, she did not want to inform Colin Dudley, because every time she wanted to admit it to him, she recalled their conversation where Colin said that he absolutely did not want children, and that he was very happy about Rebecca being infertile. The news that he might have a daughter or son could destroy a real family, and Cassandra didn't want to hurt her lover, so she kept the news a secret. Meanwhile, her belly was growing, and it was impossible to hide it under the oversized sweaters, and in order to Colin did not guess anything, Cassandra stopped seeing him. But how to move on? She couldn't hide it for long, and if she lied about having another boyfriend, it would hurt Colin and cause them to break up. Cassandra decided that the bitter truth was better than a sweet lie, so she told Colin over the phone that she was expecting a child with him. Colin was silent for a while, and then he finally said that he was delighted to hear the news. It sounded very strange, but Cassandra concluded that Colin was genuinely pleased. The detective arrived at Colin's house, knocked on the door, and his wife opened it. Deciding that it wasn't quite ethical to talk about a missing mistress in the presence of Colin's legal wife, the detective introduced himself as an old friend of Dudley's. Colin came out, immediately shut the door behind him, and walked away from the house with the detective, though the latter hadn't even introduced himself yet. It was as if he had been waiting for this meeting. "Thank you for not making your credentials public in front of Rebecca. You're a man of honor, a true officer. My compliments to you." Colin spoke in short sentences. "I heard Cassandra is missing. It's weird, bloody weird. I can't even guess where she might have gone. She told me she'd had a big fight with her brother and was really worried about it. I advised her to stop by and make up with him. I don't know if she listened to me or not. That Cassandra and Rob had been in a fight, the detective knew. Rob had told him about it himself. It was nothing serious, just a family misunderstanding, but nevertheless, Cassandra's twin brother had been very upset about it, because the day she disappeared, Cassandra had called him and wanted to come and talk to him, but his proud brother had refused, and now he blamed himself for it. If his sister had come to see him that day, she wouldn't have disappeared. You know, officer, I'm not the nicest person. I think you realize that. Dating my ex-girlfriend in secret from my wife, and for such a long period of time, I'm sure I'll be punished for it in the next world. But the human heart doesn't decide who you fall in love with. In 2014, my father died. He literally hated Rebecca with all his soul, and the feeling was mutual. But he really liked Cassandra. He often remembered her, reproached me for the fact that we broke up with her almost immediately after Christmas. We often fight with our parents, accusing them of not understanding. And then it turns out that it's us, their children, who don't understand, and it hurts. My father was right, of course. And after he died, I just wanted to fulfill one of his wishes, and so I resumed my relationship with Cassandra. Rebecca needed to be broken up with. It was a conversation I kept putting off. You know, this family stuff sucks you dry, so I kept stalling. I've been living a double life for 5 years. It was hell. I had to make excuses for coming home late all the time. To hide it, I'd tell her about some fictitious business trips and even bought a fishing rod, even though I hated fishing, a stupid pastime. And I'd tell Rebecca I was going to the lake while I went to Cassandra's. Before coming home, I'd buy fish at the supermarket for extra convincing, and Rebecca would bake it in the oven and I'd eat it, even though the smell of fish makes me sick. Did you know Cassandra was pregnant? What? Pregnant? By whom? I don't have that information, but she told a close friend of hers that it was from you. That can't be true. She's been adamantly refusing to see me lately, and I guess I understand her and can't blame her for that. Naturally, she was tired of being in the background and wanted a family, which unfortunately I couldn't give her. I guess that the reason she refused to see me was because she had found someone else. When was the last time you saw her? Asked Detective Colin. Honestly, I can't even remember. I think it was about 3 months ago, maybe 4 if you don't count the time we literally ran into her at the mall by chance. But that was fleeting because my wife was in the fitting room, and I just got tired of waiting for her and decided to take a walk to the coffee shop. Tell me, officer, is there any chance you'll find her alive? Dudley asked one last time. We're doing everything we can. Believe me. This was not Colin's last encounter with the detective. even though Cassandra's phone, which was lifted from the bottom of the pond and could not be recovered, but the police requested the details of the calls of the missing person, and it turned out that most likely the unsigned number about which her mother told her belongs to Colin Dudley. Most often Cassandra called him, and even on the day of her disappearance, they called each other. In addition, on that day, the police received CCTV footage from the train station near the bridge, where Cassandra's abandoned car had been found, and on it they saw a strange man who stood out in the crowd of passengers on the platform. He wore a long cloak, gloves, his face was swathed in a scarf, and a hat was placed on his head, the sides of which covered his eyes. It was impossible to make out the face, but the detective said that the man's gait reminded him very much of Colin Dudley. As for the hat, it was almost identical to the one worn by Alex from A Clockwork Orange. After continuing to follow the strange man through the CCTV cameras, the detectives noticed that he literally went into the cafe for a few minutes, then came out of there and went towards the parking lot, where he got into his car and drove away. During all this time, the stranger never showed his face, but they could see the license plate number of the car in which the stranger got into, and the car belonged to Colin Dudley. A unit was sent to his house with a search warrant. The detectives had hope that Cassandra was alive and in the basement at Dudley's house. At first, there was no evidence of a murder at Colin's house, but in the closet they found the very hat Colin was trying to cover himself with. They then went down to the basement, but Cassandra was not there, nor was there any evidence of the crime. However, the service dog, which was trained to search by the scent of blood, barked as it sniffed the couch, and that was already a very alarming bell. Colin assured that he had done nothing illegal, that the police simply had no evidence and no other suspects, so they were trying to pin the crime on him, an innocent man. The detective interviewed his wife, who of course was shocked at what was going on in their home, at the accusations against her husband, and at the fact that she had been deceived for years. Yes, she could say a lot of things about her husband and her emotions, but when the detective asked her if her husband was capable of murder, she, after thinking about it for a long time, answered in the negative. All the evidence that had been found against Colin wasn't enough to put him in jail, which made Rob and Mary Smith very angry, and the detective was just throwing up his hands. Colin was called in for questioning again. He thought carefully about the crime as he had an alibi for all the allegations. On the morning of August 25th at 6:30 a.m., Colin visited a hardware store where he purchased household cleaning chemicals as well as trash bags. And indeed, the store's cameras confirmed it, but the large trash bags overshadowed this situation. Colin then received a text message from Cassandra that she was almost at his house, but he immediately deleted the message, but it remained in the cell phone carrier's memory, and the police got it from the call and message dump. Also, according to their cell phone billing, the couple did not leave the house that morning for several hours. Colin then turned off his phone, but left his mistress's phone on, most likely by accident, and police saw the entire path of his movements, including where he was seen on the station's CCTV cameras. As the police already knew, after the cafe, where he was probably recovering from the murder by washing up in the toilet, Colin got into his car and drove to the pond where he had dumped Cassandra's phone, where the last signal from the cell phone had been received. It was now necessary to search for Cassandra's body. The police, in order to accurately track the route, seized a GPS tracker from Colin's car. The device completely replicated the movement of Cassandra's cell phone signal, but there was new evidence in the case based on his movements the next day. The cops retraced his path that went through the woods, and there in a ravine they spotted a huge trash can tied with ropes. All the ground around it was covered in blood, and it became clear what was in the container. Yeah, they were right. By then, it had been a month since the murder, and identifying the body was difficult. The police were helped by Cassandra's tattoo, which was described in the search notes. Colin was apprehended the same day and charged with murder. Forensics conducted a forensic examination and indicated that death was caused by a fractured skull due to blunt force trauma. During the examination of the basement of the Dudley house, the police found traces of blood, which could not be completely cleaned. Rebecca knew nothing about the murder. All day she spent in another part of the house, from which no noise in the basement cannot be heard,
and she also confirmed that Colin never wanted children, and his story about her infertility, just a fiction. The police took this as a motive for the crime. During the trial, due to the lack of witnesses, physical evidence, such as the murder weapon, it was impossible to convince the jury that the murder was committed by Colin Dudley. Then, the court made a deal with the killer that if he pleaded guilty, he would get a lesser sentence. Colin was sentenced to 26 years in prison. Cassandra's mother and her brother, who still felt guilty that he had not agreed to meet with his sister before her death, were very upset, because the killer would most likely live to see the moment when he could go free.
Jeremy Ogden, a detective with the Hobart, Indiana Police Department, leaned over his desk, staring at a manuscript that had kept him busy for years. The diary bore witness to a tragic story involving 53-year-old Christopher Reagan. Christopher Reagan was born in Detroit, Michigan. In this city, he lived his early years, and there he received his education. When he reached the age of 20, he decided to join the ranks of those who were willing to defend their country. Christopher found his true calling and devoted himself to the service of his country. With honor and devotion, he stood guard over the peace of the citizens. This choice forever determined his fate. Christopher was sent to a military base located near the cozy town of Marquette. Here, on the military base, not far from Marquette, fate brought Christopher together with Terry, a young teacher from the cozy town of Iron River. Recalling their acquaintance, Terry told the detective how, being young, they saw each other and sympathy arose at first sight. Young people often met on the streets of the city and embarrassed to say hello, and over time, began to walk together. Communication became more and more frequent and closer, and eventually grew into friendship. For several years, they remained only close friends because the service in the Army did not leave Christopher the opportunity to build a serious relationship. At some point, Chris decided to leave the military service and move to Traverse City, a city located in the same state, but far from the place where his beloved lived. However, the distance did not become a barrier to their feelings. On the contrary, communication between them became even closer, and in December 2012, Christopher proposed to Terry to start a long-distance romantic relationship. Both were single at that moment, knew each other for many years, and always observed the line of propriety. Terry happily agreed. After a short time, the lovers realized that they had many common interests: a love of nature, a preference for a measured lifestyle, a thirst for tranquility. That's why Iron River became the perfect place for both of them. The couple made the decision to live together. Christopher moved in with Terry, found a job at a factory producing parts for military ships, and soon he had his own subordinates. Life was shaping up in the best possible way. However, after 2 years of living together, problems began in the relationship between Christopher and Terry, and the passion gradually faded. As young people did not try to overcome the difficulties of this difficult period, it became obvious that they would not be able to keep their connection. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to part ways. The parting was peaceful, and the former lovers managed to maintain friendly relations. After breaking up with Terry, Christopher could no longer continue his life in her house, so he decided to rent his own place. As time went on, it dawned on him that he wanted to change where he lived as well. Iron River seemed too small, and Chris began looking for a more dynamic and vibrant city. He responded to job openings in various locations by sending out his resume. In October 2014, fate presented Christopher with the opportunity to start a new chapter in Asheville, North Carolina. Here he found not only a job, but also a cozy place with many picturesque natural attractions. In a new city, Chris was about to start his life anew. On October 14th, Christopher wrote Terry that he had taken the day off and would be free the next day. The reason was a doctor's appointment, after which he suggested they meet up and go for a walk, as they had often done when they still lived together. However, on October 15th, he did not contact his girlfriend. Terry was worried. She tried calling him for several days. Concerned, she contacted mutual friends, but they knew nothing.
10 days later, a worried Terry filed a police report about Christopher's disappearance. The report was accepted, but the police were quick to comfort Terry, assuring her that people sometimes disappear for a while and then return, sometimes even ending up in other places. At the police station, Terry also revealed that Christopher had recently received a job offer in North Carolina. For the police, this was reason not to be too concerned, suggesting that he may have made it to his new residence and decided to start a new life, severing all ties to the past. To avoid making idle speculations, investigators launched a detailed investigation. They managed to identify the company where Christopher had recently started working and contacted one of the employees to find out what he knew about Christopher. However, astonishingly, no information could be obtained. Christopher had not shown up for work in 10 days. The police speculated that he might have been the victim of an accident, given his frequent solitary trips outdoors. Search forces headed into the local woods, trying to check everything on the paths Christopher liked to explore. Specially trained dogs were deployed to reinforce the search, but unfortunately, no trace of the missing man was ever found. Terry then suggested a visit to Christopher's former apartment in order to make sure that no accident had happened to him. Perhaps traces could be found there that would indicate his current whereabouts. Agreeing to Terry's suggestion, the investigators went to the home of the missing Christopher. Upon entering the apartment, the detectives were struck by the chaos inside. Items were strewn across the floor, closets were left open. Their first thought was that Christopher was probably just a sloppy person and had forgotten to clean up. Terry, however, immediately refuted this idea, claiming that her ex-boyfriend was not that sloppy. The detectives began to lean toward the idea that all of this might be connected to the crime. After inspecting Regan's home, it was decided to start searching for him on a larger scale. The police looked carefully through the neighborhood and finally found Regan's car outside the city limits, about 8 miles from Iron River. It was unlikely that he had left his car there intentionally. They had to break one of the doors to get inside the car. There was nothing suspicious in the interior. On the seat were ordinary clothes, such as those often found among locals: hat, coat, gloves. However, one of the policemen carefully noticed on the front passenger seat a small piece of yellow paper with a route written on it. It was decided to follow the route indicated in the note. There was no specific address on the paper, but the route was described in detail. Terry explained that despite living in Iron River, Christopher still hadn't learned the names of streets and roads, so he wrote down directions like turning at a bus stop or driving past a gas station. Terry shared that, judging from the detailed notes, this was the first time Christopher was headed to this location. The group of detectives followed the route indicated on the piece of paper. This route took them to a neighboring town. Stopping in front of the house noted in Christopher's notes, the investigators knocked on the door. They needed to find out who lived there and why Christopher had traveled that way. The door was opened by Jason Cochran, an overweight man who was surprised to see uniformed men in front of his house. His wife, Kelly, soon appeared. The officers informed the couple that they were investigating the disappearance of Christopher Regan, and a piece of paper found in his abandoned car pointed to this address. Kelly candidly revealed that she worked with Christopher at the same plant, and they got along well, and were even friends. She had not been in contact with him in recent weeks, but in mid-October, she tried to contact Chris via text messages. She received no response and assumed he had gone to North Carolina for a new job. Kelly also mentioned that Christopher had been having health issues and may have just decided to start a new life. Investigators found themselves in a quandary. They did not understand why the route that led to the Cochran home was written down on a piece of paper found in the missing man's car.
Despite the lack of answers, the couple expressed their willingness to cooperate with the investigation. After a brief questioning, without getting the information they needed, the detectives left their home. The next phase of the investigation was a conversation with Christopher's co-workers. The detectives went to the factory where they interviewed workers and supervisors. One of the supervisors revealed that Christopher was having an affair with Kelly Cochran, and rumors had been circulating for months. This statement sparked interest, and investigators decided to re-interview the Cochran couple and clarify what was really going on in their relationship. In the end, Kelly admitted that she and Christopher did have an affair, but she was unable to disclose it the previous time because of her husband's presence. She and Jason, she said, have an open relationship, and Jason is generally okay with his wife's affairs on the side. However, the topic was sensitive and may have hurt his feelings. Christopher's co-workers, for their part, refuted Kelly's words. They stated that Jason was far from approving of the affair and there was no loose relationship in the Cochran family, as Kelly claimed. Following Kelly into the police office was Jason himself. A conversation with him unequivocally revealed that he was adamantly opposed to his spouse's infidelity. This position made him a suspect. Nevertheless, the lack of conclusive evidence made it impossible to conclude that he was involved in Christopher's disappearance. The officers had no choice but to release Kelly and Jason from the police station. The investigation dragged on for 5 long months, and the mysterious mystery remained unsolved. On March 5, 2015, the case was placed in the hands of a new investigator who immediately began actively working on it. The first order of business, Hobart Police Department Detective Jeremy Ogden began a thorough analysis of the Cochran family's history. Kelly had met Jason while still in high school, and immediately after graduation, they began living together. The two were completely different in personality. Kelly was open, socially adept, and loved to talk. Jason was known for his reticence and taciturnity. He never started a conversation first, only answering questions asked of him. Despite these differences, the couple decided to get married. After the wedding, the couple started their own company, providing swimming pool maintenance services. The business was modest, but it brought them a decent income. Most of the pool maintenance work was taken on by Jason. The constant stress and strain took a toll on his health. The man began to have back problems, and every day he felt heavier and heavier. One day he realized that he was unable to continue the business. That's when Kelly took over all the work of running the business. It was a difficult period, but she trusted that her husband would soon recover and return to his duties. While his condition was getting worse day by day and the medical drugs were not bringing the desired relief, Kelly looked for all ways to help her husband recover. One day, she learned about a plant that offered hope for Jason's recovery. There was a chance, although its use in medical practice had only recently begun. It wasn't available everywhere, especially since it was banned in the state where they lived. For Kelly and Jason, the only way to get the drug was to move. They chose Michigan and moved to Iron River Township in 2014. Here, Jason was able to consult with a doctor and get a prescription for a miracle plant. Finally, his agony was going to be over. So, in early 2014, the plant, which specializes in manufacturing parts for U.S. warships, brought a new employee, 34-year-old Kelly Cochran, who had moved with her husband Jason to the area. Kelly made every effort to ensure her family's financial well-being, and the couple took a job at the same plant where Christopher Regan worked. Christopher and Kelly found common topics of conversation and over time became close friends. This companionship was of particular importance to Christopher, who had recently been having difficulties in his relationship with Terry. After reviewing all the evidence, the prosecutor made a strong case to a judge in Michigan to obtain a search warrant for the Cochran's home. After successfully obtaining a ruling, the very next day, March 6, the prosecutor sent a team of investigators to the couple's residence. The search of the Cochran house was conducted with special care, trying to find any traces indicating the possible involvement of Kelly and Jason in the disappearance of Christopher. However, all efforts were in vain. The only important find was a book, authored by Jason. He used a pseudonym from the world of video games. The title of the work caused a smile, but its content was horrifying. In this dark and violent book, Jason described murder scenes of everyone who had ever wronged him. The detectives read the book from cover to cover and noticed one of the characters that matched Christopher's characteristics exactly. Suspicions about Jason grew stronger. Perhaps he wasn't making up the crimes,
but was inspired by real events he had committed. Given the heightened suspicions, it was decided 3 weeks later to conduct another search of the Cochran house. The investigation hoped to uncover evidence that might have been missed in the previous search. When police officers drove up to the Cochrans' home, they found that no cars were in sight and the yard and driveway were empty. Attempts to knock on the door were fruitless. No one opened the door. It turned out that immediately after the initial search, Kelly and Jason had left town and moved to another state, Indiana. Their quick getaway had investigators worried because they feared they might not be able to find the crucial evidence they had been hunting for months. It was especially important to collect DNA samples from the suspects. That's when Michigan police officers contacted their Indiana counterparts, asking them to take DNA samples instead. Ready to help, the Indiana police officers headed to the Cochrans' new home. The couple, for their part, did not object at all to the procedure, as there was no legitimate reason to charge them with murder. Nor was there any evidence of the victim's body itself. The investigation was gradually losing steam, leaving less and less chance of solving the disappearance of Christopher Regan. Time passed, and suddenly, on February 22, 2016, a call rang out at the police station in Hobart, Indiana. On the other end of the line was a worried Kelly Cochran. She tried to explain that her husband, Jason, was not breathing, but in her state of panic and emotional shock, it was difficult to provide specific details. Rescuers arrived on the scene where Kelly, in a state of utter panic, obstructed doctors. However, it soon became clear that Jason would no longer require assistance. He was sitting in a chair, his face burning with fire as if from extreme overheating. The doctors were forced to confirm his death. The body was sent for forensic examination. Kelly was handed over to a police patrol who took her to relatives who lived nearby, down the same street. Determined to find out the circumstances of what happened, investigators searched the Cochrans' new home. During the search, one of the officers discovered a syringe needle at the foot of the marital bed. After evaluating the condition of Jason's body, the investigator concluded that his death was caused by abuse of illegal substances. However, the forensic report came as a surprise to the detectives. Although Jason was found to have an excessive amount of illegal substances in his system, the forensic results pointed to something more shocking. Jason's death was caused by strangulation, as confirmed by bruises on his neck and face. Thus, Jason, the prime suspect in the kidnapping of Christopher Regan, was himself a victim of the crime. This discovery led to new questions and a re-examination of the evidence. Forensic experts immediately turned their attention to Kelly Cochran, who seemed to be the link between the two crimes. Now she was to become the prime suspect not only in Christopher's disappearance, but also in her husband's murder. This investigation became an even more complex puzzle. On February 23, 2016, Kelly Cochran was invited to the police station to testify in Jason's murder case. During the interrogation, the investigators asked her directly about her involvement in her husband's death and whether she had administered excessive doses of illegal drugs to him. Despite the lack of concrete evidence and pressure from the investigators, the young woman did not confess to either the murder of her husband or the kidnapping of Christopher. Several months later, investigators have not been able to find convincing evidence of Kelly's guilt, as well as the grounds for a possible arrest. During the course of the investigation, Detective Jeremy Ogden encountered Walter Hammerman, a close friend of Jason's, who, upon learning of the horrific incident from Kelly herself, immediately rushed to the police. Walter emphasized that illegal drugs could not be the cause of Jason's death, as he knew his friend well, and he would certainly tell him about any changes in his life. Moreover, Jason had been using only medicinal herbs with the sole purpose of getting rid of the back pain that had accompanied him for a long time. However, Walter noticed that his friend had been in a difficult situation lately. In March last year, Jason shared his worries with him, saying that he and Kelly had to travel to Indiana because of suspicions of the Iron River Police in their involvement in the disappearance of a man. Everything that had happened had greatly affected Jason. He had even become depressed and tried to take his own life. which required serious treatment. Walter also noted a distinct change in his friend's behavior. Kelly began to take more and more control over his life. It seemed that Jason was constantly on edge. Whereas before the boys could spend hours playing video games together, Jason now began to avoid parties as soon as his wife returned from work. This information became an important link in the investigation and allowed investigators to understand what was going on in the Cochran family. After the medical examiner determined that Jason had died from strangulation, Detective Ogden began to devise a cunning plan to force Kelly to tell the truth about the fate of Christopher Regan. It was decided to use Walter, Jason's close friend, as bait to lure Kelly into a trap and force her to make a mistake. Walter accepted a difficult role. He was to become a tool in the hands of the investigation and play out a performance in front of Kelly Cochran. On March 12, 2016, he called Kelly while under the watchful eye of police officers equipped with a listening device. He was to give Kelly a fictitious letter from Jason that supposedly contained something important. Walter also told Kelly that her husband had given the letter to her shortly before his death, with the condition that he not open the envelope and immediately send it to the police if anything happened to him. Suddenly, Kelly asked Walter to drop the idea. And this came as a real shock to both Walter and the police officers who had been monitoring the situation. However, despite this revelation, detectives still had no direct evidence. In the weeks that followed, Kelly was subjected to numerous interrogations by investigators in an attempt to get the truth out of her, but she continued to deny her guilt. On April 26, 2016, it suddenly became clear that Kelly Cochran had managed to slip away from the scrutiny of investigators. It was like a mockery of justice. Detectives immediately joined forces with police officers from Iron River and Hobart, announcing a federal manhunt for Kelly Cochran.
Walter Hammerman, who cooperated with police, was shocked and frightened. He feared that the perpetrator would never be found and that she could once again get away with it and might later attempt to attack him. Kelly's phone was off, as if she was enjoying a game of cat and mouse with the cops. After 2 busy days full of anxiety and turmoil, Detective Jeremy Ogden managed to find out that Kelly Cochran was off the west coast of the United States. She had cleverly eluded the police and traveled to Kentucky, to the town of Wingo, located more than 6 hours away from Hobart. A detective contacted the local police, warning that upon discovering Kelly, they should arrest her, exercising extreme caution given her potential danger. On April 28th, police officers located Kelly at her cousin's home. The arrest team, responding quickly to the information, proceeded to the house. Knowing that Kelly could be dangerous and prone to escape attempts, they acted quickly and without warning. That afternoon, Kelly Cochran was apprehended and taken into custody. Detective Ogden arrived in Wingo, where he resumed interviews with the suspect along with investigators from Indiana and Michigan. After speaking with Kelly Cochran, everything became clear. The story of her relationship with Christopher Regan was much deeper and more serious than everyone thought. She felt true love for him. Kelly dreamed of leaving this cursed city and starting a new life with him. But everything changed on October 13th, 2015, when Jason found out about her cheating. They were fighting, and Jason remembered the pact the newlyweds made on their wedding night. According to that pact, the cheater was obligated to kill his lover if his cheating became known to his other half. Kelly claimed that she had never taken that agreement seriously. She thought it was a joke. But Jason was serious and warned her that he would do it himself if she didn't keep her vow. Kelly didn't want to take that responsibility, but she helped Jason commit this horrible crime. On the evening of October 14, 2015, Christopher Regan arrived at the home of his mistress, Kelly Cochran. It was a moment he wanted to enjoy their encounter while Kelly's husband was away. The young woman offered him dinner, then a pleasant time and intimacy. Everything was going according to plan. Their evening promised to be special. The lovers had dinner and, according to Kelly, went up to the second floor of the house, but their solitude was interrupted by Jason's sudden appearance. He burst into the bedroom with a rifle in his hands. Panicked and terrified, Christopher realized he was in a death trap. Jason, without hesitation, took aim and fired a shot at Christopher's head. The bullet mortally wounded him, and Chris died on the spot. Afterward, under Jason's direction, the accomplices dragged the body into the basement and began dismembering it using a hacksaw. Christopher's limbs and head were detached from the torso. The perpetrators placed the remains in several trash bags and then disposed of them by dumping them in the woods near the village of Crystal Falls. They drove Christopher's car away from the house to ward off suspicion. The couple thoroughly cleaned the house to remove evidence of the crime. The couple were accomplices to a terrible crime. Kelly Cochran also did not hide her participation in the tragic death of her husband. According to her, the idea of revenge was born when Jason, having discovered that Kelly had a lover, decided to commit the crime. Kelly, in turn, wanted to get back at him for the loss of happiness with the man she loved. She confessed that she was deeply in love with Christopher and felt that her spouse deprived her of the opportunity to be happy. She never could come to terms with the loss and the pain she felt on a daily basis. Kelly hated her husband for what he had forced her to do and realized she couldn't continue to live peacefully with it.
The opportunity for a crime came on February 22, 2016, when Jason complained of back pain. Kelly talked him into giving him a shot with a medication. The dose of the medication was too high, but for some reason it didn't work properly. Seeing that her husband was still breathing, Kelly suffocated Jason by covering his mouth and nose with her hands. Later, just in case, Kelly squeezed his neck to make sure her husband was already dead. This explained the appearance of bruises on the victim's body. After Kelly Cochran's testimony, she actively cooperated with police to help determine where Christopher's remains were buried. On May 18, 2016, Detective Jeremy Ogden, along with a team of investigators and a canine team, went to a site near the village of Crystal Falls. This seldom visited neighborhood had become the hiding place of a terrible mystery. The team of investigators began a thorough sweep of the woods around the lake, each member carefully penetrating between the trees. One of the canine dogs suddenly detected a faint odor and led the officers forward. All the other officers followed the dog tensely, expecting the reveal to be close. The dog led the group to an unassuming hill littered with fallen leaves and branches. Clearing it, the investigators found objects. One of them was unmistakably a human skull. Upon closer examination, it was obvious that the victim had been murdered. The bullet hole spoke for itself. Investigators had no doubt that they had discovered Christopher's severed head. Also found at the scene was a .22 caliber bullet, a broken gun, and glasses that probably belonged to Reagan. Dental records were used to identify the victim's remains. The missing person case that had plagued investigators for 2 years was finally solved. In April 2016, Kelly Cochran was formally charged with the murders of Christopher Regan and Jason Cochran. On February 13, 2017, the 34-year-old criminal was arraigned in Michigan State Court. The prosecutor emphasized that Kelly significantly diminishes her role by being the mastermind behind both crimes. He argued that Christopher viewed his relationship with Kelly as an occasional encounter, while she genuinely loved him and planned a future with him. Christopher's refusal to have a serious relationship with her led to rage, and Kelly decided to kill him by making up a story about a pact with her husband. The prosecution had strong evidence, including Kelly's confession. In court, however, she presented a different version. According to her, she was being abused by her jealous husband, who arranged the crime. He hid in the basement that day and caught the lovers off guard. Then he grabbed a gun in a rage and shot Christopher. The idea of dismembering the body was Jason's suggestion, and he coerced Kelly into helping by threatening to kill him. The new version made the jury wonder about Kelly's guilt. They deliberated for 3 hours and still reached their verdict. Kelly was found guilty of the premeditated murder of Christopher Regan. She was given a life sentence without parole. Jason Cochran's case did not go to trial, as a plea agreement was reached and Kelly was sentenced to 65 years in prison. From the courtroom, Kelly Cochran was sent straight to Crown Point Correctional Facility in Ypsilanti, Michigan. There she is, serving her sentence, and only regrets that her personal life did not work out. In one phone interview, Kelly stated, "I tried to do what I thought was right. You go to school, you go to college, then you get married," Kelly Cochran shares in an interview. "It was good in the beginning, but in the end, all my efforts were in vain. All I did was work all the time while my husband entertained himself with computer games."
Within the prison walls, Kelly continues to reveal details of her crimes. She claims that she and Jason committed more crimes and Christopher is just one of their many victims. The details, names, and additional crimes Kelly does not disclose make it difficult to corroborate her words. Kelly's brother has also heard from her that there were more victims, but there is no concrete evidence to back that up at this time. Detective Jeremy Ogden of the Hobart, Indiana Police Department is scrutinizing the details, hoping to uncover some clues and find evidence of other possible crimes committed by Kelly and Jason Cochran, in hopes that this additional evidence will help close a chapter in this dark story.